Hello, I'm 𝗪𝗔𝗧𝗖𝗛, the Senior Internal Audit Advisor for Audit Board, and welcome to another in my series on Agents of Change. I'm joined today by an old friend and colleague from my days at the IIA, Shannon Urban. Shannon is the Vice President and Chief Audit Executive at Hasbro, and prior to her time at Hasbro, she served for almost 19 years in the EY risk practice. I can't also overlook the fact that Shannon was a very influential volunteer leader for the IIA, served in a number of important posts, including the chairmanship of the North American Board. Shannon, it's good to see you and welcome to our video series.
Great to see you as well, Richard, and thanks for having me.
Shannon, I authored a book on Agents of Change, subtitle Internal Auditors in an Era of Disruption. And I think we can certainly agree that we have been in a period of disruption now for a number of years. And, you know, it's kind of what makes things exciting, I think, for us as internal auditors. Would you agree?
I would. One of the reasons I've stayed in internal audit as long as I have in my career is that I'm constantly faced with challenges and constantly learning new things and how to do things differently. It does keep things exciting.
Yeah, I had similar experience earlier in my career. I took a short hiatus out of internal audit and went over into an accounting role, and I nearly died of boredom. I wanted to get back into internal audit where I could get my fingers on so many different things. Shannon, in the book, I define agents of change in internal audit as those internal auditors who are catalysts for ideas that help transform and improve the business. Is that how you would define an agent of change? And what's your view about internal auditors being in an influential position to foster change?
So I think, internal auditors are actually uniquely positioned to be great agents of change across our organizations. We have this purview that gives us cross-organizational perspective. We're regularly interacting at the highest levels of the organization. We've got unfettered access and license to, quite honestly, question and provide our thoughts on areas that are mission critical to the business. So, I actually love the definition that you came up with in the book, because I think it hits on two critical traits that I think all internal auditors will need to be successful in the future. That concept of being a catalyst, right, which means to precipitate action. And here we're talking about transformative action, right? So that means we need to think big and we need to think differently than we have maybe historically. And then that concept of creating value, which means that the work that we're doing is actually making the business better. It's moving it forward. I think we're in kind of in a unique position to bring unique value to those kinds of discussions, because we think about risk and opportunity, drivers of risk, and how to manage those risks, as well as, we bring a strong foundation in governance and internal control, which a lot of folks don't have. So I think it's, we're, as I said, really well positioned to be change agents in our organizations.
You kind of have a unique perspective, I'm sure, because of all of the folks we're interviewing for this series. You've spent a longer period of time in client service and probably had the chance to touch more internal audit functions than everyone else combined. And I guess my question to you is, from your experience, not just where you are now, but across those years of working in client service at EY, what's your perspective? Does management, and more importantly, perhaps, or as importantly, the board, believe that internal auditors should be agents of change?
Yeah, you're right. One of the reasons I stayed in consulting for so long was just the opportunity to interact with and learn from and work with so many amazing companies. By and large, based on my experience, I think management and boards value internal audit. The one challenge I do see is that they expect us to show up a certain way. They expect us to come in and tell them everything they've done wrong. It's a very kind of old school view based on their past experiences, and they don't know to expect any different. But when we show up differently, when we come in talking about the business and the risks to the business and strategies and impacts and outcomes, and we're bringing insights or sharing things that they haven't contemplated yet coming out of our work, then we're speaking their language, and then they really welcome that. So, as long as we can pivot as internal audit to really be a business partner and speak the language of the business and bring that unique risk and control perspective to the table, I think that, in my experience, most are very receptive to that. It's helpful.
Now, Shannon, in the book, I argue that before internal auditors can be seen as credible change agents in their organizations, they have to kind of walk the talk. They have to be willing to look at internal audit itself and, where needed, implement transformative change. My question to you is, do you agree with that? And then secondly, what are the areas that you think are the most ripe for enhancement in an internal audit function?
Yeah, Richard, I completely agree. And I've been saying this for a long time, that just like it's an imperative for the business to continually stay on top of changes that's impacting them and the need to adapt to meet the market, customer needs, increased competition, whatever the driver is, so do we as internal audit need to transform to meet the needs of our stakeholders and our organizations. We need to be innovative. We need to be thinking differently than we have before. In my experience, I used to work, as we talked about, in consulting, and I joke sometimes that I work with internal audit functions that felt like I was jumping back to 1999, kind of some of the same practices and ways of working that I had used way back early in my career. And they're, good work. It's quality work, great audits, but following kind of dated practices that really weren't in tune with the environment or really what the organization needed. So I think, that need to transform can be sometimes a little bit threatening. It's a big word, right? Denotes major change, but we really need to look at kind of our ways of working in internal audit and challenge if it's still fit for purpose, and really achieving the objectives that our organizations need from us. There's a lot of areas I think where we could benefit from that. But technology is one area that I know a lot of organizations are jumping into: data mining, data analytics, all of those kinds of things. But even things that are a little bit more straightforward. We're taking a look at our processes and our how we pull together audit reports and what the content and structure of those reports are, so that they're more easily digested and understood by management. So it can be something as simple as that'll help move the function forward.
Yeah. You mentioned technology, and certainly that's a very important, what I call capacity multiplier. It makes internal audit more efficient and effective. Are there any practices you've seen that really stand out in your mind from your years in working with internal audit functions? What areas do you think are the most powerful for internal auditors to be looking at?
Yeah, I think we could all agree that the power of data and being able to access data and turn that into information is incredibly powerful, an added capability for internal audit. We're very used to only seeing a sample of the population or a small subset of transactions across the business. But when you can grasp all of that information, all of that data, and look at it holistically over not just maybe 3 months or a year, but 3 years, multiple years, and bringing all that together, it's incredibly powerful, and it tells you a story. It tells you stories about what's happening across the organization and if things are working the way they're supposed to or not. So that ability to do data mining and even process mining, leveraging the capabilities in technology today, I think is incredibly powerful. We're not there yet at Hasbro with our technology, but we've realized that that's something we need to invest in over the short term pretty quickly.
Shannon, one of the approaches that I took in the book, similar to what I did in the book Trusted Advisors a few years ago, was to reach out to chief audit executives like yourself and say, or ask them the question of those members of your team who, in this case, have been powerful change agents. What are some of the attributes that they bring to the table? And when we got done analyzing more than 600 responses, we kind of narrowed it down to 4 broad strengths or attributes that powerful change agents in the internal audit profession share in common. They are business acumen, strategic mindset, an innovative mindset, and relationship centric. So my question to you is that a list that that resonates with you, and are there other things that you might add to it?
Yeah, I think those are absolutely four characteristics that anyone who wants to be a change agent needs, right? Change agents generally need to think like executives. We need to speak the language of the business, as I mentioned earlier. We need to make investments in relationships and be good business partners, and just constantly approach things with an eye toward, what is the opportunity for change within the organization. But I think change agents also understand that, without those partnerships, nothing happens in an organization, right? So you kind of need to know how to socialize your ideas, how to gain support and rally the right people and the right resources around any kind of idea toward change, whether it's something we're trying to do for ourselves within internal audit or something we're trying to promote out in the business. So if I were to add anything to that list, I think it would be, call it an element of savviness, just knowing how things get done, and in many cases, how things get funded in your organization. And I'd also throw in the confidence to kind of work that network of business partners and relationships to get things done.
Shannon, one of the things that I recall from our years working together over at the IA were that you were a huge proponent of collaboration, that internal audit shouldn't, to borrow a phrase out of the IA's current 3 lines guidance, independence doesn't mean isolation. And what I can recall is that your proponency of internal audit collaborating with those in other lines of defense is that it became a powerful alliance that could benefit the organization. Any additional insights you might share on that? And is that, do you think, important to be effective as a change agent?
I absolutely think it's critical. I was very fortunate to be able to work as part of a member of the working group on the refresh of the 3 lines of defense model. And one of the things that we constantly talked about was, while it's important for internal audit to be independent and objective, as you said, that doesn't mean we operate in a bubble and don't talk to anyone or don't coordinate or work with anyone else across the organization. In fact, we're better at what we do in internal audit when we have those relationships and when we do work with others. And the general reality is, for many internal audit functions, we can't cover all the risks we want to. And so we need to rely on others. We need to have partnerships with second line functions, traditional second line roles like compliance and risk management and quality assurance, what have you, because they play vital roles in the organization as well. And so that concept of, I think, combined assurance, or just call it generally working together to understand and make sure at least somebody's got their eye on the myriad of risks that any organization is facing on a global basis today is critically important. We need that as internal audit to be really successful, and the organization needs it as well. If we're all operating in our own little silos or swim lanes, not sharing information, not coordinating our work, there's going to be overlaps in what we're doing, which is completely inefficient, and there's going to be gaps where risks kind of fall through the cracks, and that's the last thing we need to happen today.
Last question. It's not uncommon that I get asked, and I have over the years more times than I can remember, what do I see in the future for internal audit? And if I were to ask you to pull out your crystal ball and talk about what the challenges and opportunities are for the next 10 years for this profession, what would be the things that jump to mind?
So I would say the biggest challenge that we're going to face, it will be staying ahead of risk. We have to build a core competency and a capability across all levels in internal audit of being able to constantly pull in data, external and internal information, insights, thought leadership, studies, you name it, right? And really analyze and understand, digest what are those trends, those activities, whatever's happening out there in the world, how is that going to impact our organization? And then helping to make sure that the organization is paying attention to that as well. I think just with the pace of change, the velocity of risks increasing at a multiple year over year, this is going to become harder and harder to do. So if we continue kind of with our, annual risk assessments, or just going out to the business and meeting with them a couple times a year and saying, tell me about your risks, I think we get closer and closer to being irrelevant for what the business really will need over the next 10 years and beyond. If we're successful at doing that, I think it creates a tremendous opportunity for us as well, because it enables us to be forward-looking, not just backward-looking, and it's hugely valuable to the business. So if we can help the business kind of sift through all that noise, translate all that information, all that data into insight and foresight, right? Help them to look forward and see around the corner, then, I think we become more akin to being indispensable than irrelevant.
Shannon, it's been a couple of years since we worked closely together, and you've made some exciting transitions during that time. And I look forward to seeing what great things you're able to accomplish in the future. In the meantime, thanks for joining us today, and I look forward to having further discussions with you in the months and years ahead.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's great. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.